for all kinds, right? And we met every month for half a day, lots of work, and Guns Anti-Crime Council started doing some really remarkable work. After a year, after one of these meetings, she came up to me and said, you know, I'm getting worried. I'm starting to like these guys. Subsequently, she was nominated by President Kennedy for appointment to the Federal District Court in Massachusetts, and found that her confirmation was in the hands of a guy named Jesse Helms. Who was Jesse Helms? You guys do know who he was?
Yeah.
A very, very conservative reactionary, call him what you will, United States Senator from North Carolina, who was very upset about the fact that this counsel of the Civil Liberties Union was being nominated for a federal district court, you know, these soft-on-crime civil libertarians, right? And she called me. She was very concerned. I said, you go in there and tell him that you're a member of the Governor's Anti-Crime Council. She did, and she got confirmed. And served very ably as... So, what's the point of all of this, folks? You bring people together. Now, whoever is doing the convening has got to be a pretty skillful mediator, right? Kofi Annan. Imagine getting these 16 countries to agree to a conference only to find the United States wouldn't show up because Iran was one of them. That could have been the beginning of what? A peaceful process leading to a stable, more democratic, pluralistic Syria. That's the whole point of it. But should Iran have been there? Absolutely. I mean, you cannot talk about a settlement in Syria, the Middle East, without Iran being at the table. It's absurd. But I'm a great believer in that process. Does it work always? No. Do you need occasionally to have a kind of law enforcement presence to make sure it works? Yes, but it beats what's been going on lately. Who's next?
We have one question back here.
Yeah.
My name is Divya Joshi, and I have also graduated recently from MIT Sloan. I'm from India. You're right that international institutions are the right place to take collective action. But why do you think these institutions today lack teeth to take action in situations such as Putin's aggression, which could be a potential problem? And second thing, I would like to hear your perspective as to, in this changed geopolitical situation with China's rise as a superpower, what should be US policy to retain leadership position?
Let me answer the second question first. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. There's no such thing as the world's superpower. If there ever was, it's gone. And that doesn't bother me at all. I'm not particularly interested in my country being the world's only superpower, whatever the hell that means. Because generally what it means is that the world's only superpower, no matter who it is, kind of decides it really is the world's only superpower, and there's nothing it can't do, right? What we're talking about is a world in which nations respect each other, and when they have disputes, and they will, there are credible and effective forums for resolving those disputes. Example, the EU. I mean, the EU, folks, historically is remarkable. Europe has been at war since the beginning of time. What happened here? Two brutal world wars, right, in which Germany was defeated both times, and finally a coming together in the form of the European Union with rules, with procedures, with its own court, by the way, for resolving some of these disputes. Is it perfect? Did it make sense to adopt a common European currency? I'm not sure it did, particularly if you're Greek. It doesn't make a lot of sense. What about European economic policy these days? I mean, you know, we tried Herbert Hoover economics in this country in 1929. It didn't work. I don't know whether Europeans are trying it these days. And there's still people in Congress that think that Hoover economics is the way to solve recession. Fortunately, Obama and Congress ignored them. And these days, this country is coming back economically, but it's not in Europe. But nevertheless, I mean, the creation of this remarkable institution that we call the EU is a miracle from a historical standpoint. Now, can we do the same in other parts of the world? With the Organization of American States is a similar kind of organization. I mean, this is the first time in my lifetime that there hasn't been conflict in the Western Hemisphere. Amazing, except for this U.S.-Cuban thing, which is so stupid. And I hope sooner, not later, will finally be resolved in the way that I think Kennedy, had he lived, would have resolved it. And if we finally welcome Cuba into the Organization of American States, believe me, Cuba will change. And then the question is, how do we help Cuba to make the transition to a genuinely democratic and prosperous country? But these ASEAN doing some pretty impressive things in Asia. Question, can we create similar kinds of institutions under the aegis of the UN that will make it possible for these half a dozen countries in Asia to stop threatening each other over these damn islands, most of which are worthless? I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Where do you do that? Well, in normal civil society, you do it in a court of law. That's what the World Court is supposed to be. That's what these tribunals created under the law of the sea are supposed to do. So it's not as if we don't know how to do this. The question is, do we want to do it? And speaking as an American, I want to see my country pushing this all the time. Well, there's been some of this in connection with the situation in the Pacific. But I want to see the international community, led by the United States in this case, pushing hard for all of these countries, some of whom are our allies, some of whom aren't, some of them, to embrace this notion that international institutions can fairly and effectively make these decisions. But I don't see us doing that anywhere near as much as we should.
We have a question at the front as well.
Hi, my name is Jetson. I'm from Yonkers, New York. I'm a first year.
Not a bad place.
And I'm a first year PhD student in economics. A lot of things that you discussed, like sitting down with Iran, or not investing as much in these new weapons technologies, require buy-in in the domestic politics of the United States. How do we, and I mean me and you, and maybe other people in this room, as Democrats, succeed against what feels like an increasingly radicalized conservative movement?
Very good question, although I'm not sure that, at least when it comes to international policy, what I guess you and I domestically would call a radical right-wing group is committed to this kind of international intervention. Rand Paul is a guy who thinks we ought to be pulling back, less intervention. And by the way, public opinion in the United States these days is not for another military intervention, which is one of the reasons why Obama is moving very, very carefully when it comes even to trying to deal with ISIS in some military way. So I think American public opinion, when it comes to the international side of this thing, guys like Paul and others, who, by the way, are being taken on all the time by the McCains and the Grahams. I said to somebody the other day, somebody ought to put Lindsey Graham in front of an armed column in Syria and tell him to go lead the charge, see how he does. I mean, I think public opinion is with us on this stuff, and it includes the right as well as the left. Here again, however, I mean, if you're committed to the kind of stuff that I'm suggesting, you got to practice it, and you got to demonstrate that it will work. And one or two victories, if I can call them, in which international institutions are used to resolve these things, can go a long way toward convincing people that, in point of fact, this is the right approach. But I think American public opinion these days, across the spectrum, is very skeptical of more military intervention. On the other hand, are they outraged over the fact that 2 American journalists just got beheaded? I'll say, and they should be. Well, we're putting together something, but there's no appeal to the UN here. We're going to put together another coalition that are willing or something that want to do something about this. I mean, is there any country in the world that thinks it's a good thing to behead journalists? I don't think so. So here it seems to me is an opportunity to appeal to the broad international community, specifically in this case. And I'd like to see us doing that more emphatically than we have. But there's a lot of support in the right for this kind of thing. Now, maybe these folks tend to be more isolationist and all that kind of stuff. But you read what Paul says about our international posture. It's interesting. It's well worth reading. It's well worth reading.
We have one more
Who's
question back here.
Yeah.
Right. I guess I'd like to follow up on the previous question.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you, for example, you mentioned the F-35 program.
Yeah.
And Lockheed Martin's been very careful to put plants all across the U.S. so that
True.
every single congressman votes for it for the
That is
sake
true.
of creating jobs.
That is true.
So I think the broader question is, yes, the American public might be against international intervention. They might even question some of the military spending. But there's a lot of money to be made. So how do you go about combating this? I mean, I think realistically, at the bare minimum, we need to do something about Citizens United, but I think that's not enough.
Sure.
So what sort of action do you think we the people can take to fight against this influx of money, foreign influence, et cetera, et cetera?
This Supreme Court is the worst Supreme Court in my lifetime. And one of its members happens to have been a classmate of mine at Harvard Law School. And his name was Anthony Scalia. Even then, he was to the right of me, that's what happened. But I thought in a kind of honest, conservative way. These days, I think Scalia's off the rails. I mean, it's all about policy. He thinks he's a member of Congress or something. Citizens United, folks, was a terrible decision. Why? Because we've been regulating campaign contributions and expenditures since the late 19th century. Nobody ever suggested there was anything unconstitutional about this. Money is speech. Where does it say that in the Constitution of the United States? McCain, who's a big fan of, as you know, a big advocate for campaign finance reform, a few years ago somebody said, oh, Supreme Court's talking about money being speech. He said, if money is speech, then 99% of us are disenfranchised. That's a quote from McCain, and I agree with him. Now, the only way you're going to change that, at least in the short run, is to amend the Constitution. I think there would be huge support to do that. There's nobody, I know, I mean, vast majority of Americans are very troubled by these scads of money that just pouring into campaign, from right and left, by the way. Now, you know, right pours it in, the left pours it in, here we go again. So I agree with you on that score. Now, what about the politics of significant reduction in arms? A result earnestly to be desired, I would think, if you can do it. Well, that's not easy. It's not easy. But it's kind of like the politics of climate change. I'm with the president when it comes to climate change, and I think you know, Mitch McConnell's dedication to coal, while understandable from a local economic situation, makes no sense at all, right? I mean, it's getting worse, folks, I think. Latest report is getting worse. We're making no progress on this. But I think the administration would have been well advised, as part of the president's announcement that he was going to use his executive authority to the EPA to dramatically reduce the use of coal, to come in with what? With an economic development program for Kentucky that would have made it possible for the 70,000 people, and it's all it is these days, not the 500,000 it used to be, the 70,000 people who make their living in the coal industry, to do something else that's constructive. And we know how to do that. I mean, we've done base conversions that turn, those of you from California, that have turned into very successful industrial parks that employ people and actually employ more people at better wages. But it's not, I'm not going to suggest to you it's easy. I don't know, can Lockheed Martin make a train? Because I'm a big train guy.
Yep.
I want to see the United States investing in high-speed trains all over this country, just like the rest of the world, which is going right by us, folks, when it comes to ground transportation. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. China soon will be completely covered with an integrated high-speed rail system, trains running at 200 or 220 miles an hour. South Korea, I left it as a young GI in March of 1957. It was a third world country with a per capita annual income of $50. Kitty and I were invited back there. to go to a student conference. I said, you want to go back to where your husband spent 16 months of his life? Why not? She said. Back we went to Korea. Folks, Korea has a superb transit system in Seoul. Not one, but two high-speed rail systems. We couldn't find where my unit was, up close to the DMZ, because there was this huge commuter rail station in one side of Korea, where I was stationed. I mean, they're going right by us. So, one of the challenges is, can we somehow take this money we're spending on F-35s and super carriers and this latest, what, supersonic long-range bomber? I don't know what terrorists we're going to be targeting with a supersonic long-range bomber. I don't think we'll get them. Can we somehow maybe help the aviation industry or the transportation industry generally to transform itself into effective manufacturers and designers of high-speed equipment? I spent hundreds of millions of dollars, folks, on transit equipment when I was governor. The team, when I first got elected, was an absolute basket case. You have no idea how bad it was. I'm very proud of what we were able to do to turn into a modern public transportation system, which obviously is a key to a lot of what's happening in the Boston area these days. And I hope you're writing it regularly. Not a nickel of that money bought an American-made piece of transit equipment. We've lost the ability to make a train. We've got some foreign subsidiaries that are now making streetcars and light rail vehicles in the United States, but no American companies, with one or two exceptions. This is pathetic. There's a lot of jobs there. There's a lot of jobs building high-speed rails, a lot of jobs building equipment. Why aren't we at this? Well, the President in 2009, 2010, got himself a down payment on a high-speed system, $8 billion. 100 states made applications for grants under that $8 billion of $100 billion. There's that much demand for this. What happened? As soon as the Republicans took over the House of Representatives, bang, that was the end of it, which is crazy. Who was the president responsible for the Transcontinental Railroad in this country? Any idea? Without whose leadership it would never happen. No.
Andrew Johnson.
Abraham Lincoln. Right in the middle of the Civil War, right in the middle of a very tough time for the Civil War, he said, we're going to the West Coast. Transform. I mean, the railroads of the 19th century, thanks to Lincoln, became the internet of the 19th century. What took 6 months took 5 days. Remarkable. In fact, building the Transcontinental Railroad was in the Republican platform of 1860. When did trains become ideological? I don't get this. So how do we deal with that? You got to bring folks together. You got to convince them. So look, none of this is easy, but I think there are ways to make an effective movement from military to non-military kinds of activities in a way that is far more beneficial in the United States and to the environment and a lot of other things, and puts a lot of people to work doing useful things. That's the challenge. Who's next?
We have one last question.
One last question.
I'm Maria Zawanowicz. I am a third-year grad student here at MIT, and I'm an atmospheric chemist. So here is,
Where are you from?
I grew up in Chicago, but we're from Poland.
From Poland.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
Atmospheric chemist, and you have started, you said that climate change is getting worse. So, so what are your ideas about solving this global problem, seeing that it is an international policy
No question.
problem? Do you think the U.S. should be a leader in decreasing global emissions of CO2? How should we do it?
Yeah, the U.S. has got to be a leader in this, not the only leader. And there's an issue here, obviously, a difficult one. You've got developing countries like China and India who want to develop themselves, and they want to be able to use fossil fuels to do so. China's, I think, the biggest coal user in the world. So how do we work with China? How do we help them to move to other forms of energy? How do we help ourselves to move to other forms of energy? But yes, the United States must be a leader in this. This is exactly where I want my country to lead. And we know what it's going to take, right? I mean, we've got to do everything we can to move to alternative, non-polluting forms of energy, which, by the way, can help to build an economy, employ people, do a lot of things. So here again, I don't think this requires a lot of complexity here, but it does require political will. And there's no question in the United States is still a division between the folks that, you know, want to move in this direction and folks that don't. And that's, you know, what the democracy is all about. But certainly this is a case where I think American leadership is very important. And this problem, I think we can agree, must be solved internationally, right? I mean, Massachusetts and Boston and a few other places can do their best, but in the scheme of things, if there is not international agreement and an international agency with the authority to set standards and enforce them, then it's going to be very difficult to do this. Can we bring people together? Can we create consensus? I hope so, folks, because the consequences are too disastrous to contemplate. Of course, the United States got to be an example. The United States also, I hope, will lead on this, but again, it requires broad international agreement and machinery which can infect. Now, we seem to be able to do this when it comes to world trade, don't we? WTO works. It has enforcement machinery. It uses it. And on the whole, it's been pretty effective. Can we do that for the environment? I hope so. Well, I guess I'm getting the hook, so that was the last question. In any event, I hope this will at least stimulate your thinking, folks. Look, I don't know any more than you do about this stuff. But I've been on the planet for 80 years, if you can believe it. And this beautiful woman has been on the planet for 77. In fact, she's a walking advertisement for Medicare. Speaking of healthcare. But, you know, you're the future leaders. You're the folks who are going to have a lot to do with what goes on in this world. And feel free to disagree with me, but I do think it's this course that we have got to embrace. All of us, wherever you come from. And I hope we'll do so. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Please join me again in thanking Professor Governor Dukakis for such a brilliant speech, and thank you so much, Neil, for inviting the governor here today. And of course, thank you so much for gracing our event.
Okay, I guess that's it. You're free to go.
So a few people will be joining us for dinner with Governor Dukakis. If you are one of those, please go to the back of the room and collect your name tag, and we'll meet you on the way out. And for everyone else, there's a compostable trash can. Please dispose of yours, and thank you once again for joining us. Good night.